semester in our Colloquium series, Rethinking the University. My name is Susan McIntosh. I'm the director of Scientia. Our colloquia this semester continue to look forward to consider the shape of the university in the future. Next month, Dean Judith Brown will talk about the changing role of the humanities at Rice. In March, Peter Huband will visit from UC Santa Cruz to talk about politicizing the university. And in April, President Gillis will close our series with not one, but two talks on the future of universities in general and Rice in particular. It's some measure of how fast conditions are changing that when we started planning this series over a year ago, the notion of a talk on the virtual university seemed very future-oriented. We did not guess that a virtual university, Jones International, would have received accreditation before today's talk took place. AAUP's subcommittee R on distance learning had already decided in 1997 that, quote, distance learning is not a future possibility for which higher education must prepare. It is a current reality whose growth potential is essentially unlimited. Important questions regarding the impact of distance learning, of faculty control over the use, distribution, and reuse of course material have enormous implications for academic freedom and for the role of faculty in creating and accrediting academic programs. The University of Phoenix, for example, has an Internet MBA program and has not felt any necessity to apply for accreditation from the International Association for Management Education. How this trend will play out is anyone's guess. You can cast your bets with Peter Drucker, who believes that universities as we know them will disappear in 30 years, or perhaps you are more confident about the resilience of the university in the face of massive technological, economic, and social change, and take comfort in Clark Kerr's observation that universities are, after all, one of the few institutions of Western society to have survived from medieval times, essentially unchanged. Either way, the potential for transformation exists, and the pathway we travel will to some extent reflect how faculty do or do not participate in the debates and decisions that are made. The virtual university is a topic with which we all need to become more familiar. We are therefore delighted to welcome to campus someone who has thought deeply about the subject, Dr. Frank Huband, who will be familiar already to a number of you in the engineering school. I'm going to, at this point, turn the podium over to Dean Sidney Burris of the School of Engineering, who will introduce Dr. Huband and extend my apologies that I have a family medical emergency and I unfortunately will miss this talk. But we do have it on tape, so if you know anybody who wants to see this and had to miss it, it will be available in Fondren Library. Sidney, thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. I want to also welcome this group to what I consider to be a very important lecture. Frank Huband did his undergraduate and graduate work at Cornell University, and his graduate work was in a very both theoretical and practically important arena of information theory, what lies behind a great deal of the technology that Susan alluded to and Frank will be talking about. He was on the faculty here in electrical engineering for several years. He decided that he needed a law degree, went to Yale Law School, received a law degree at Yale, went to the National Science Foundation in their legal department, but then went back to engineering at NSF, where he led some programs that essentially are examples of what the NSF was able to do and to initiate that have made a real difference in technology today. After a number of years at NSF, he went as director of the American Society for Engineering Education, a society that had gotten itself in bad trouble, had become rather stagnant, and over the past few years, Frank has been able to turn that organization around, and it now is a wonderfully progressive group that is occupied the leadership position in higher education and certainly in engineering. So today, Frank is going to tell us about the virtual university. Frank?
here at Rice. Every Friday afternoon for about 4 months, we would meet in a room somewhat smaller than this to discuss the responsibilities of the group, which it was the Fondren Library Lecture Lounge Renovation Committee. I suspect they've ripped down that particular room, but it was an interesting period. It was good to get to know people from other parts of Rice, and amazing friendships there that have lasted. So that was interesting. My background, as had mentioned, is in engineering education, and so much of what I say will be biased by that fact. But I think that the thrust of what I'm going to talk about is relevant to educators and education in most disciplines. U.S. education is the envy of the world. Students come from every corner of the globe to participate in the U.S. college experience. Scholars arrive from distant lands to study our system. We've sent faculty and deans to China, Korea, Russia, Egypt to disseminate the greatness of the American system. Germany, you'd think that the core of engineering from time immemorial is converting their entire education system from their engineering degree to bachelor's and master's, 4-year bachelor's, just as we're changing maybe to 5, because they can't compete with the power of the American educational system. But not everyone's happy. Average tuition levels have been increasing faster than inflation since the 80s. Dramatically increased diversity of both the students and faculty population have not been accompanied by an adjustment of teaching styles to accommodate those changes. There's a general perception among the population of low faculty interest in student learning. This perception appears to be validated by the reward system at most universities, which focuses on research success. Now, to focus for a moment on the impact of student diversity on effective teaching, a recent report from the Committee on Learning, Research, and Education in Practice of the National Research Council, entitled How We Learned, identifies as a principal finding that students come to the classroom with preconceptions about how the world works. If their initial understanding is not engaged, they may fail to grasp the new concepts and information that are taught, or they may learn them for the purposes of a test, but revert to their preconceptions outside the classroom. The committee report concludes, teachers must draw out and work with the preconceived understandings that their students bring with them. In a classroom with a diverse student population, identifying and engaging all or even most of the students' preconceptions is a challenging task. In engineering, there's a preconception or perception among many students that their education lacks relevance to the real world. The fact that many, perhaps most, engineering faculty come to their positions with no experience in engineering and little, if any, preparation for teaching perhaps encourages that view. Additionally, there are increasing calls for additional materials to be added to the engineering curriculum. Biology, environment, ethics, and law, even as complaints increase that engineering curricula are already too full. A solution, and engineering deans are trying to cut back on the number of hours in the engineering degree, and many states are cutting back on the allowed number of hours in state schools that any degree can have. A solution to this apparent dilemma would be to increase the efficiency in the teaching learning process. However, although computer communications and related technologies are permitting the development of educational systems of increasing power and effectiveness, a majority of faculty still use teaching technology only moderately more advanced than that of Aristotle, perhaps substituting a whiteboard and marker for slate and chalk. Even though academia was created to be a conservative of values and ideas and appropriately values resistance to current fads, we are, I believe, at the beginning of an era of radical changes in higher education. In this presentation, I want to identify possible directions for these changes. There are, of course, many educators that are thinking about these issues. Jorge Flor de Alva, the president of Phoenix University, that I'm sure you've heard of, was mentioned in the introduction, in the current issue of Issues in Science and Technology, published by the National Academy of Sciences, points out some specific calls for change. He notes that in 1998, a poll of 50 state governors was reported in a paper titled Transforming Post-Secondary Education for the 21st Century. The 4 highest priorities identified by this survey of 50 state governors were, first, to encourage lifelong learning. 97% of the deans of the college, states governors concurred. 97% said the highest priority was encourage lifelong learning. To allow students to obtain education at any time and in any place via technology. 83% of the governors agreed with that. To require post-secondary institutions to collaborate with business and industry in curriculum and program development. 77%. And to integrate applied or on-the-job experience into academic programs. 2/3 agreed. What about maintaining traditional faculty roles and tenure? One dean, one governor, probably a former dean, agreed, at least a former faculty member, agreed. 1 out of 50 agreed that that should be a priority. A second survey, identifying prospective change pointed to by De Alva, was a recent poll primarily of university presidents, administrators, and faculty by the academic accrediting organization, the North Central Association of Colleges and Schools. Respondents identified 4 trends as likely to have the greatest impact on that accrediting organization's activities. Increasing demands for accountability. 80% thought that that was going to be critically important. Expanded use of distance education, 78%. Increasing attention to learning and teaching, 72%. And expanded use of the internet, 71%. In the same issue of issues, a more traditional educator, Jim Duderstadt, former president of the University of Michigan, identifies several themes that he believes will factor into the higher education enterprise. He suggests that education will be learning-centered, affordable, lifelong learning-oriented, interactive and collaborative, diverse, and will use knowledge and distributed intelligence technology to foster the construction of learning environments that are not only highly customized, but adapted to the needs of the learner. In other words, each student will get a separate education derived from the use of technology, and that this will be interactive and collaborative. This is an old-line engineering professor turned president. In his retirement years, contemplating where he thinks the university will go. And he's been there and done that. That was striking to me, because University of Michigan is a major state university that has traditions, has state supervision, and for him to believe that we were moving into a direction where the learning environments are highly customized and adapted to the needs of the learner, using knowledge and distributed intelligence technology, was impressive. So what's happening now? One major change is the increased use of distance education courses. A recent report from the National Center for Educational Statistics of the Department of Education noted that 78% of public colleges and universities, but only 19% of private colleges and universities, provided a total of 52,270 distance courses in 1998. That's twice as many as existed just 3 years before. Similarly increased were the number of student enrollments, up from 750,000 to 1.5 million in that same period. 82% of the schools currently providing distance education, or planning to soon, said that they intend to provide their distance courses primarily through asynchronous internet instruction. The days of satellite and videotape is passing. Another study, the 1999 Campus Computing Project, notes that 47% of their respondents reported that their institution offers one or more full college courses online through the internet and the World Wide Web. That same study reported that more than 3/4 of all campuses have internet development programs or information technology development programs. About 2/3 have campus support centers to assist faculty in bringing technology resources in their courses. But only 1 in 7 have a formal institutional program to recognize and reward the use of information technology as part of the faculty review process. If you don't reward faculty for doing something that's hard, it's going to be hard to get them to do it. Even high school degrees or diplomas are being offered online. Kentucky Virtual High School is a publicly financed program which brings internet-based high school classes to students throughout the state. Many of the courses used in this program are provided by the University of Nebraska's for-profit subsidiary, ClassCom. Now, as many of you know, University of Nebraska has been providing correspondence courses since the 20s. They're now working to produce a complete high school program over the internet. They've created right now about 32 web classes. By the end of this year, they hope to put enough additional classes to be able to offer a complete high school curriculum over the internet. For the last year or so, the University of Texas has been offering a full range of high school courses through mail, fax, CD, courses on a disk, and the internet. Undergraduate and graduate degrees are being offered online. Concord University School of Law, established by the Washington Post's Kaplan Educational Center. You know, Kaplan testing. They've created the Concord School of Law. Offers a JD degree online, with graduates being eligible to sit for the bar of the state of California. Of course, you are all eligible to sit for the bar. You don't need a degree to sit for the bar in the state of California. In the first enrollment period, Concord signed up 170 students at $4,200 a year in tuition. I'll say a little more about Concord later. Many traditional universities are also offering online degrees. Stanford offers several, including a master's degree in electrical engineering. They're supporting that with a wide array of research projects intended to optimize distance education and to improve its effectiveness. Students must select approximately 15 courses out of 30 offered online in order to graduate. Classes are streamed to individual computers with the content optimized for bandwidths from 28.8 kilobits per second to multiple megabits per second. Since the spring of 1997, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute has offered distance-based master's degrees in a variety of areas, and by the fall of 1998 had awarded more than 600 such degrees. Georgia Tech is offering an electrical engineering master's degree and is providing to students at Georgia Southern University content to allow them to get Georgia Tech degrees. Georgia Tech is the only public university in Georgia allowed to offer engineering degrees, and they want to keep it that way. And by streaming the content to other schools and letting them get Georgia Tech degrees, this will reduce the pressure on the legislature to allow Georgia Southern and Southern Polytechnic to offer undergraduate engineering degrees. Online classes also let small colleges expand their offerings. Wolford College and Furman University, both in South Carolina, are sharing language classes at a distance to increase the breadth of courses available to students at both schools. Middlebury College is sharing a virtual lecture series with a number of other colleges and is also leading a project that will bring together 62 colleges interested in using technology for language instruction. And students from several liberal art colleges in the South will be taking an online archaeology course, which would not be feasible for their own schools to offer. The most visible innovators in this area are the large-scale new providers. Phoenix University, which now enrolls almost 100,000 students, calls itself the largest accredited university in the United States. It's primarily a shopping center-based university today with convenient physical classes, but more than 10,000, or 10%, of their students are internet-based, and the rate is growing at 50% a year. Perhaps since current non-traditional programs require maturity and motivation beyond that possessed by a typical college-age student, Phoenix requires all of its students to be at least 23 years old and have a job. The Open University of the United Kingdom has more than 200,000 distance-based students, and its educational quality has been ranked as the 11th best of hundreds of British universities. More than 20% of part-time students in Great Britain are taking their courses through Open University. A U.S. branch of this organization is beginning its first class next month, and several degree programs will be offered beginning this summer and fall. U.S. Open University will offer students at universities that partner with it, even Rice if they choose, a virtual year abroad program. Which will allow students to enroll in specific courses at Open University in the United Kingdom. Students will receive British course materials, be allocated a British associate faculty member as part of a British student group of approximately 20 students, and participate in course tutorials and discussions by email. Open University of the United Kingdom is engaged in a substantial research program related to enhancing the learning process for distance-based education. The program's two general sponsors are Apple and Sun. Perhaps most interesting of the innovative new providers is Western Governors University, a follow-on to the Western Virtual University or some such thing that had serious difficulties. The university, the Western Governors University, grants associate and graduate degrees and undergraduate certificates based completely on competencies. The student's ability to demonstrate their skills and knowledge of a field of study, not on required courses. No courses are required. Each student is assigned a mentor, an expert in the student's field of study, who helps the student create a plan and calendar for completing the degree program. Western Governors University carries out the testing of each student's competencies at the appropriate time in the student's program. The fee for these services varies from $1,500 for an undergraduate certificate to $3,850 for a master's degree. Note that I said nothing about courses. The fee doesn't include any educational materials. But Western Governors University does offer, for an additional fee, distance-based, what they call learning opportunities, relevant to the entire set of competencies required for the degrees and certificates offered. Some of these courses are prepared by Western Governors University, but most are provided by 50 or so other universities and corporations, ranging from Texas Tech and Washington State University to Skillsoft and Novell. Western Governors University estimates that the typical student will need to purchase about $3,000 in learning opportunities in addition to the degree fee in order to develop the necessary competencies for a master's degree. These are a few of the many initiatives that I believe are beginning to reshape higher education. And I want to talk now a little bit about the prospects for the next several decades. The technology will surely advance. Internet speeds available to the home will soon match or exceed the T1 speeds that have been common in corporate and academic environments. And with continuing video bandwidth compression improvements, quality internet-based video to the home will be feasible and will be common. Improvements in learning theory should make it possible to tailor instruction to the needs of the individual. But what structure will be developed to deliver instruction? Kenneth Green, director of the Campus Computing Project, whose work I cited earlier, suggests that there are three components to the instructional mission of higher education. The first is content, including information, structure, values, applications, and skills. The second is context, including the learning environment, relationships, and socialization. The final component, certification, including outcomes assessment, sequencing, and degrees. Green suggests that in the future, these components may not all be offered by the same provider, and that some students will accept their education without all three. We've seen that Western Governors University, in this model, provides at its core the third component, contracts out most of the first, and ignores the second. I'd like to construct a hypothetical future extension of this approach, which I will refer to as Fantasy University, and then discuss some of the challenges and implications. As I build my fantasy, I'll ignore certain difficulties, but I'll come back to them when the fantasy is finished. As the first step in their college career at Fantasy University, prospective students log onto their registration/mentor webpage and identify their general areas of interest. Through a series of interactive steps over a period of several weeks, the registration mentor, perhaps involving the combined capabilities of an expert system computer program and one or more computer or human experts in the disciplines of interest to the student. Over a period of several weeks, they develop a set of competencies and experiences that would be sufficient for a degree and meet the student's desires and expectations. Adjustments to these competencies and experiences would be allowed and expected as the student went through the program. In disciplines such as engineering, where degree programs are currently accredited, the expert system computer program would contain a virtual degree program accreditation component, much easier than a visit, that would be applied to the candidate's set of competencies and experiences to assure that that set met minimum standards. Once the registration mentor and the student reach agreement on the initial structure of the student's degree program, a contract is signed and the student participates in a series of knowledge/preconception assessment activities, as well as assessment of the student's receptiveness to various teaching learning styles. Based on these assessments and the degree program agreed to, the curriculum computer system, then shares with the student a series of 10 to 20-minute course modules. Each module contains relevant information and interactive components that both serve to keep the student's interest and assess the effectiveness of the student's teaching. Each module is available in multiple presentation styles, such as talking heads, multimedia presentation, problem-based instruction, question and answer, computer simulation. The presentation styles used for a student would be varied to maintain interest, but would be biased in favor of the styles found to be effective for that student. In addition, at the successful completion of a module, students would rate each element of the module in terms of how well it retained their interest, how effective it was for them, and how well they liked it, and any recommendations for improvement. If the student appears to be having trouble with a particular module, the system can either present prerequisite modules that seem to be a source of difficulty, or the same module using one or more alternative styles. The student continues to receive instruction in a particular module's content until he or she has learned the material to the depth required. And depending on the agreed-to curriculum, a student may be required to understand a topic to a greater or lesser degree. For example, a student whose primary discipline is in English might be expected to acquire a greater level of detail in an English literature course than an engineering student who is learning elements of English literature as a broadened experience, and vice versa. Built into the program would be an agreed-to series of experiences. Most of these might be short-term, job-like experiences in areas of the student's interest, but they might also include visiting a museum, traveling to another city, or building something that uses knowledge gained in the modules. Some of the activities might appear similar to an advanced Boy Scout merit badge. Some might take only a few hours, but others might require months of activity. Employed students might opt for fewer experiences, but would have to fit the experiences they did opt for into their schedule. At the end of the degree program, unlike most current students' experience, students will not graduate with a transcript filled with letter or numeric grades. The transcript will describe the competencies and experiences of the student, and the student will have achieved all of the competencies and had all of the experiences listed. The principal variable will be the length of time the student needs to complete their studies for the degree. My discussion of fantasy university so far has covered content and credentials, but has ignored context, the environment in which the studies take place. Today, college students typically study on a campus, filled not only with instruction, but also with social interaction, including mentor and colleague interactions, and the opportunity to meet and interact with students of the opposite sex. The flexibility of the 24/7 nature of fantasy university allows the students to study in any environment they choose and can afford. Students having limited funds could maintain a full-time job and learn at home. For students with greater resources, the private sector will certainly provide attractive environments in pleasant surroundings. One could contemplate Club Ed as a source of a pleasant learning environment. Students could shift, of course, from one environment to another, from Club Med Cancun to Club Med Acapulco. Some environment providers might cater to students in specific disciplines, with subject matter mentors available for consultation. There might even be a few underused university campuses, which would offer the use of the Fantasy U students to take their courses on the campus. At the top of the financial ladder, one could imagine an elite stratum of students who would travel the world with content producers as they prepare their modules, visiting hydroelectric plants in Venezuela, if they're engineers, and participating in the preparation of a module on the Mona Lisa at the Louvre, if they're art historians. If fantasy university were created, would it be successful? I believe it would be an attractive option for many students. Most folks I talk to about their undergraduate experiences describe the efficiency of their learning as pretty low. Often, lectures were redundant with required readings, or at a level enough below or above the student's readiness to understand that the students tuned out. Many of my colleagues describe entire courses that could not capture their attention and were lost to them. It would not surprise me if an integrated learning system operating, as I have described, Fantasy University, outcomes-based, focusing on competencies attained rather than courses taken, could graduate a better educated students in half the number of hours currently required. Students could use this reduction in study required in many ways: to shorten their program, to extend their level of learning, or simply to use the freed up hours in fun and frolic. Another strength of the Fantasy University approach is that it segues very nicely into lifelong learning. The same approach, indeed, much of the same content, could be made available to the graduate for a fee. Whether for just maintaining the current expertise of the graduate, developing new areas of competency, or obtaining a higher degree, the Fantasy University system would be available to the graduates. Many scholars of lifelong learning today are arguing for the creation by educational institutions of EMOs, educational maintenance organizations, parallel to the HMOs of the health industry. Fantasy University would be ideally structured for this purpose, charging graduates a fixed annual fee for sustenance access to the system. From the perspective of the accountants at Fantasy University, the huge economy of scale that the system provided would motivate them to turn over every rock to find additional students, including cutting deals with state legislators and university trustees to provide content to existing schools at dramatically cut-rate prices. This would allow research universities to hire as faculty pure researchers who would need to do no teaching and to use the curriculum robot of Fantasy University to provide instruction. Although many faculty members might find such an arrangement highly desirable, the question is how long academic research funding would remain high if academic researchers did no teaching. Well, at this point, the future gets pretty blurry, except that if one or more fantasy universities came about and dominated the content of university education, only the best teachers, those that could produce the most effective teaching modules, would still be at the game. And they'd be highly prized and highly paid. Other former faculty could become student mentors or question answerers, but probably at much lower levels of compensation and prestige. So what are the obstacles to the development of a fantasy university, or even to less radical systems of content provision? One of the first roadblocks is the current uncertainty in the ownership of intellectual teaching property. Traditionally, unlike research intellectual property, which is usually owned by the university or shared between the university and the professor, teaching intellectual property has been assumed to lie with the faculty member who develops it, even if it is developed on university time and with university resources. For example, faculty members who write a book based on the course they presented, or who move to a different university and teach the same course they developed at their former school, or go to another school to teach a summer course developed at their home university, are seldom challenged for such behavior. And the reason for that is there's not much money in it, and so they don't care. Recently, however, with the high-stakes potential of internet teaching, things have begun to change. I participate in the Engineering Deans Institute, which brings together about half of the country's engineering deans, 300 engineering deans, to a pleasant venue for a few days to discuss very important issues. For the last several years, at the cocktail hour before dinner, I've asked several deans whether they had any concerns about the ownership of teaching intellectual property. The first 2 years, every dean I talked to, everyone said no and looked at me as though my question was irrational. Only in the last few years has the question generated serious response. In some quarters, the issue has turned litigious. Earlier I mentioned the Washington Post Kaplan Concord University School of Law. One of the senior members of the school's board of advisors and a lecturer in its internet courses is one Arthur Miller, one of the most visible members of the Harvard Law School. He's prominently featured on the Concord website. His photograph and a note in which he states that all Concord materials are based on his principles are on the Concord website. Harvard is not amused by Miller's activity and has sued Miller to stop him from continuing. That's one extreme. The other extreme is that York University in Canada required its faculty to videotape their lectures, and after that, fired many of those lecturers, offered to take them back as assistants at much lower salaries. After a long strike and some fairly harsh words, York backed down. UCLA also tried to require its faculty to record their lectures, and they signed up a for-profit organization to sell its coursework, presumably including these faculty recorded courses, apparently without getting consent from the faculty or even informing them. However, general resistance to this requirement has, unfortunately, I guess, stymied that process. In the long run, the issue of who owns the right to teaching intellectual property will be resolved, presumably with some sort of joint ownership. However, to make it possible to share this property widely, there must be a low transaction cost process to license materials for lectures, course modules, textbooks, and other information resources. One possible model is an analog of the process used for recorded music. One or more licensing organization obtains the rights to most teaching intellectual property from the owners. In music, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, or ASCAP, and Broadcast Music Incorporated, BMI, are the two principal licensors. The licensors would charge fees to the universities and others for use of the material and reward the intellectual property owners with a fraction of the monies they collect based on the total use of the course modules and other information provided. And the computers serving the course modules and other information providers would track the use of each content owner's materials and provide that information to the ASCAP or BMI organizations. It's a lot easier, actually, in this hypothetical situation to do that than with broadcast music. The BMI ASCAP approach is to sample. In this instance, one could get, presumably, an exact count. A second potential problem in aggregation of content by curriculum providers such as Fantasy University will be the need for common nomenclature and notation for all those providing content to a curriculum provider in a particular discipline. And I believe one role of the content aggregator will be the establishment and dissemination of that common terminology. A third potential roadblock for a curriculum provider system could be a lack of money. Development and maintenance of such a system would obviously be a money hog. But there's a lot of venture capital around today, and internet education is one of the hottest topics on the list. Billions of dollars appear to be available to support potential profit makers in this area. In addition, computer hardware and software companies such as Cisco, Sun, Oracle are funding and carrying out research to enhance the quality of internet-based education. And there's a suspicion that Microsoft would like to own the whole business. Academic research on this topic, both in the United States and elsewhere, is also substantial. So when the intellectual property issues have been resolved, content aggregation and curriculum provider systems will likely soon follow. Just as improved technology such as increased internet bandwidth enhances the potential of internet-based distance education, the potential for internet-mediated research collaboration at a distance is also greatly enhanced. Large discipline-based university research centers have grown in importance in the past 15 years as the federal government and other sources of research funding have increased their support for these large centers. Many of the centers have been highly effective, but one problem has been, except for the largest research universities, the available faculty at a university with real interest and competence in a given narrow area of research is often insufficient to justify a center. To flesh out the proposal, faculty members having limited interest and competence in the subject matter of the center have been recruited to the activity, thus reducing the likely productivity of the center. Soon, however, as the tools for distance collaboration are developed, collaboration among individual researchers and research groups anywhere will be almost as effective as collaboration in person. Teams consisting of the world's best researchers can collaborate without leaving their home institutions. This will allow individuals who might be the sole experts in their area of specializations at their university to participate in or even lead large research centers. The National Science Board is currently evaluating the effectiveness of their international collaborative research. The funding of that has been viewed by many as ineffective. I recently discussed this with Alex DeAngelis, who's a staff member in the International Division at NSF, and he confirmed that internet-based, in addition to travel-based collaboration support, is under consideration. So what will be the shape of higher education in the fully developed internet age? The prospect of a global market will drive the production and aggregation of internet-based content. And once the content is produced and aggregated, economies of scale will drive its use even in traditional academic environments. Worldwide research collaboration through the internet will become commonplace, probably with both academic and corporate partners. One area of great uncertainty is who the players will be in this new age. If university faculty members resist participation in the development of this new academic paradigm, Fantasy University, when it comes, will be a wholly owned subsidiary of Microsoft. I encourage all of us to participate in moving toward this new paradigm, so when the new era arrives, it will contain at least a part of what is best in academia today. Thank you.
Why was it disappointing, and what is there to be learned from this? Because I don't think it's dead.
I think distance education or distance learning is hard. I think that's one reason that Phoenix requires people to be 23 and employed. I think that Western Governors University was targeted, was identified as sort of an undergraduate experience. I think that there's so little, if I'm a 17-year-old thinking, well, what am I going to do? Western Governors University is out of sight. There's no other person that I know or that anyone else knows that knows at all whether that's any good or not. I think it's inevitable that the growth will be slow, and Western Governors University itself may not ever succeed. But the thing that I think is going to happen in the future is that there will be this separation of content versus certification and context. Once you get some graduates from Western Governors University that companies say are doing a great job, and that the graduates get paid comparably to the graduates of a regular university, and they expect to be able to do an associate's degree in 18 months. I think that it will capture the attention of students that don't have a lot of money, that don't want to go to a community college. But only time will tell whether this particular approach will work. I think the most interesting thing is the use of content from the best providers they can find. As I say, from Texas Tech to Novell and 48 others. But it's getting students to say, I know someone who did that and it works, is I think an important aspect of making applications increase. And until that happens, until we know whether employers are willing to accept a degree from Western Governors University as being of any value whatsoever, there's going to be honest and reasonable uncertainty as to whether you should do it. And I wouldn't advise my kids to sign up for Oakland University, or Western Governors University rather, until there was a track record. And that's as opposed to Oakland University in England that has a multiple-year track record and a great deal of respect in the United Kingdom. I mean, people who have degrees from Oakland University are not looked down on.
I talked to the Oakland University people here. They're gleeful about Western Governors University's apparent stumbling.
Well, it gives them, I mean, they're coming late to the show, and if Western Governors University had succeeded, it might have been that there are these economies of scale. And if someone else gets in ahead of you and succeeds, it's going to be hard to catch up. But I don't think that Western Governors University has marketed themselves. I think I would have focused entirely on master's degrees and on specific certificates of competency and targeted people that were more mature. I think Phoenix has done the right thing in focusing on the more mature individuals. I think, though, as the technology gets better and as it's possible to attract and keep the attention of younger people, that Phoenix is going to drop that requirement.
Bill? Both ABET and as well as our industrial friends have been putting more and more emphasis on students getting experiences working in multidisciplinary groups, working on open-ended design problems and stuff like this. How would Fantasy University do that?
Well, there's the experience component that I referred to, if only elliptically. And many of those would be, I think, group activities. In addition, the opportunity to interact would exist in most of the environments, whatever they were. But I agree that preparing students to be able to work in a group environment and understanding leadership, followership, is something that would be an important part. You need something to supplement the web for that, yes.
Pardon?
I was going to ask you, I see a glaring contradiction, at least in the short term, in terms of the education reform movement for universities. On the one hand, we're told that we need to adopt more progressive approaches to teaching that emphasize active learning styles. On the other hand, we're told that we need to increase our efficiency by using the internet and distance learning. And if you stop and think about it, the internet is great for asynchronous approaches to education. It's horrible for interactive.
I would disagree. I would disagree.
Do you know any counterexamples? All of these education programs I've looked at don't have any interactivity in them at all.
And most of them are pretty bad.
And the prototypes that I've seen, for example, Jeffrey Fox came and talked about the Tango system. He could not even deliver telephone quality audio broadcast over the internet. The quality of service on the internet is terrible, and I see no movement on the part of the commercial forces involved.
I think that internet education will be a total failure unless it involves interactivity at a very high level, much higher level than you get in a classroom environment. That's an absolute prerequisite. You've got to have every 1 or 2 minutes requirement for students' input to the process, whether it's asking a question, answering a question, making a judgment between 2 alternatives that are presented. There's absolutely no doubt that unless there is, because you don't have anyone around. In a classroom, it's hard enough in a classroom, but you've got people watching you. If you fall asleep and you start snoring, someone's going to elbow you. In a private home where you're looking at something on a television screen, it's deadly unless there is a requirement for interactivity. As I say, probably at a much higher level of interactivity than you require in a live classroom.
That brings me to my second question, and that's looking out at the long term where you talk about NCU. And I'm sitting here listening to someone who's done some research in artificial intelligence, saying what you're proposing is the construction of virtual professors. And I say, yeah, you can produce virtual professors, deliver them over the internet and download them to my machine. Sure, you could replace us. But you can replace every other profession in the country as well. If you can make virtual professors, you can make virtual doctors, virtual lawyers, virtual bureaucrats, virtual politicians. And so, my question is, do you honestly believe that we're going to be able to produce this kind of technology? Artificial intelligence is a field that has a long history of over-promising.
Well, I think I would, because of that, never use the phrase artificial intelligence, but I think that the starting point would necessarily be something less sophisticated than I've described. I think that the idea of using linking, conscious linking by the students would be probably the starting point. But it's not hard, I think, to get some level of sophistication by asking questions of the student and having the student answer those questions, probably multiple choice and clicking on it as a starting point, to see how well the student has learned something and decide whether to move forward to the next module or to repeat a parallel module in a given area. I think that the full fantasy that I've hypothesized is a long way away, but I think a very useful subset of that could be produced even today, and certainly over the 3 to 5 year time frame. That's the shortest time frame anything like this is likely to be developed.
I think we had maybe 75 people. And let's imagine that instead of coming here, which is not expensive and hotel, you deliver instead we take you and we show you the cake.
No one would come. No one would come.
Okay, let's imagine, let's go further instead of showing you the tape, we just put the file somewhere on the web and everybody can go and click and watch it for 50 minutes talking.
What happened?
One at a time.
No. And I mean,
So now you made it well, do you think the same way we've done it for 500 years, there's a flip side of it. Maybe sometimes that's the best way to do it.
it's worked for that.
Children are still probably the same way that we've been doing it for hundreds of
Yeah.
thousands of years.
Yep.
And while the new methods coming along, it might not be as much fun.
That's true. But I think we're at a moment in time when we can create educational opportunities tailored to the individual that can be more effective in educating the individual than a lecture to 70 people. Now, in a situation like this where, it's sort of a broad, general set of concepts, you can all, and you're all mature individuals, you can all sort of capture a reasonable fraction of it. But if you were, for example, going to try and implement this, if I were trying to say, this is something that next year Malcolm has said you're going to implement, you would want something much more detailed You'd want to be able to go over the material several times. You'd want to be able to listen again to something. You'd want to be able to see it, and you'd like to see how it's been done somewhere else. And all of that is feasible in an environment of the sort I've been discussing, and it's much less feasible for me standing here in front of the audience, because you may need something that you don't need. And I can't cover it all for all of you, but in 2 hours, you could each get probably the equivalent of what I could do in a 5-hour lecture, because you'd only get those things that you needed, and not the things that he needed.
I think the time has come that,
I would like to emphasize the importance of testing at each step of the way.
Absolutely.
We made a big mistake, for example, in primary and secondary education in the 30s and subsequently when we shifted away from teachers who had, physics teachers who had degrees in physics, who taught Socratically, literary degrees who taught Socratically, and went to a system where people were sort of indoctrinated according to the Dewey paradigm and taught pre-Socratically. You know, before Socrates, there was an even more primitive way of doing it. It was the didacticism. And that's really what we have. And it's been a disaster. And at no point in the process did it occur to anybody at step by step to say, let's see what happens when we teach people this way as opposed to what happens to people this way.
And I don't think you can do testing at the end. I don't think after 4 years of a degree or high school diploma that you can do a test of everything in a period of a day, or even a month, for that matter. So it's got to be done.
Excuse me, but I'm talking about a clinical trial. I'm saying let's use Socratic method, that's method A,
Yep.
and your method B, and let's see what the
I think that would be a really valuable approach. We don't yet have the modules that would be required to do that, but at some point we will, and I think that there will be that comparison.
the point now has come to have a little bit of wine and cheese and to ask personal questions of Frank. Thank you.
Are you looking to turn it off? Or?
Thanks for coming. New millennium, whatever.
These things all, they're very simple. If you've done it before, maybe that's the tape inject. I can't read. My eyes are blurring. Can you read what this says right there? It says something inject. That's what it sounds supposed to be here. Oh, battery eject.
I couldn't get high enough to see.
Well, it's supposed to be. Well, it's if I could only turn it off. It just keeps rolling and rolling.
Just assumed something about it.
Well, it looks like this side should open up.
I think it's still.
This is just this is the power. Right? So,
Yeah, it was one of the Baker Institute things. It was a Baker Institute thing, and someone had put in a filter thing, so it was like a flames. So make it bigger. Yeah. They do some